Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. Get comfortable, and if you've been here before, you already know how this works. Grab your blanket if you haven't already. Sort your pillow out. Turn the brightness down a bit if you haven't done that. We're going to be here for a while tonight, and there's genuinely no rush. Tonight we're going to a small fictional mountain town in Colorado, a town where the laws of physics are more like polite suggestions, where a school lunch cook once had a weekly hit single, and where 4 elementary school boys have been in the 4th grade for nearly 30 years, and nobody has ever thought to question it. We're talking about South Park, and more specifically, we're talking about the stuff underneath South Park. The things the show hid in plain sight, the things that happen behind the scenes that most people who love the show have never heard. The lore that was planted so quietly across so many episodes and so many years that even the people who made the show sometimes forgot it was there. I've been going down this particular rabbit hole for a few days now, and I keep finding things that genuinely surprise me. And I've watched this show since I was far too young to be watching it, which I suspect is true for most of you as well. The thing about South Park is that it works so hard at being loud and crude and deliberately offensive on the surface that it's very easy to miss what's happening underneath. The hidden mythology, the carefully buried character lore, the behind-the-scenes decisions and accidents and near misses that shaped the show into what it became. That's what we're here for tonight. Not episode recaps, not rankings, we're going underneath. Into the stuff the creators planted and sometimes forgot about. Into the stuff they built on accident and then doubled down on. Into the stuff they've never quite explained. And if at any point you happen to drift off, that's completely fine. That's honestly the point of all this. I'll still be here. South Park will still be here. The boys will still be at the bus stop in the morning. If you're new and you want to stick around for more of these, the subscribe button is just down there somewhere and it does help. But no pressure on that. Let's just settle in. South Park premiered on Comedy Central on the 13th of August, 1997. It has now been on the air for 28 seasons, 338 episodes as of the end of 2025, not counting a collection of Paramount Plus specials, which I'll be honest, I lost count of somewhere around the 3rd one. It's one of the longest-running animated series in American television history. It has won 5 Emmy Awards. It has been banned in multiple countries, had episodes pulled from streaming platforms, and inspired actual geopolitical responses from the Chinese government. It was the first weekly television program ever to receive a TVMA rating, something that feels almost quaint now, but at the time was genuinely unprecedented territory. Most people who've watched the show know the broad strokes: 4 boys, absurd satirical situations, Cartman being Cartman, Kenny dying, Randy Marsh doing something embarrassing, the town collectively losing its mind over whatever the current thing is. It's a formula that's been running since before most of us knew what a formula was. But the show has always been doing more than that. Underneath the noise and the shock value and the topical satire, South Park has been quietly building things, seeding details across episodes that are years apart, hiding the real meaning of things inside moments that look, on the surface, like throwaway jokes, running long, slow games that the audience mostly didn't notice until the payoff arrived, sometimes seasons later. Some of what we're going to talk about tonight is about the show's origins, how it came to exist at all, which is a story that involves a VHS Christmas card, a rumor about George Clooney, and the very specific reason it ended up on Comedy Central instead of Fox. Some of it is about production, the genuinely extraordinary machine that makes this show possible, and the moments when that machine nearly broke down. Some of it is about character lore, things that were planted in early seasons, sat quietly for years, and then detonated into something much bigger than anyone expected. And some of it is about the stuff that got taken away, the episodes you can't find anymore, the exits that didn't happen the way everyone was told. Actually, before we get into any of that, I want to say one more thing about the show itself, just as a kind of grounding thought for everything that follows. South Park has always had a slightly unusual relationship with its own history. Most long-running television shows develop an internal Bible, a document, a reference system, something that tracks what has happened, who characters are related to, what past episodes established. South Park doesn't really have that in any formal way. What it has instead is the internet. Specifically, it has its fans. In July 2025, Parker and Stone were at a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, and someone asked them who the keeper of knowledge was between the two of them. The person responsible for maintaining continuity across 28 seasons. Parker pointed at the audience. He said they use fan sites, fan wikis, fan forums to remember their own show. What did his mom do for a living? Well, just go on the internet. Stone added that they pitch ideas for episodes and then discover they've already done that exact story, sometimes an entire season ago. I find that genuinely endearing, actually. The people who built this enormous, complicated thing have ceded the responsibility of remembering it to the people who love it. The lore lives in the fandom, not in a filing cabinet at South Park Studios in Culver City, which means that some of what I'm going to tell you tonight comes from exactly that place. From the careful attention of people who watched episodes multiple times and noticed things the creators may not have consciously intended. That's always worth bearing in mind with a show like this. Some of what looks like deliberate hidden storytelling really was deliberate. Some of it was planted and then forgotten and then rediscovered. And some of it is pattern recognition by a devoted audience reading meaning into things that may have been accidents all along. I'll try to be clear about which is which as we go. South Park has been described at various points in its history as nihilistic, as anarchic, as offensive for its own sake, as genuinely groundbreaking, as juvenile, as one of the sharpest social commentaries on television, as the death of taste, and as a gift. All of those descriptions are probably true of some episode at some point. The show is large enough to contain contradictions, old enough to have changed its own positions, and strange enough that reasonable people watching the same episode can come away with completely opposite conclusions about what it was trying to say. What I find most consistently true about South Park across everything I've read and watched while putting tonight together is that it was made by people who found things funny and wanted to share them. The mythology and the hidden lore and the production miracles are all downstream of that. Two people who thought it was funny when little kid voices said things they shouldn't, who gave a construction paper Christmas card to someone who passed it on, who got a show out of the whole unlikely chain of events and have been making it for nearly 30 years. The lore is the show's gift to the people who watch it carefully. But the gift started somewhere much simpler than that. Right? Let's begin. Trey Parker and Matt Stone met at the University of Colorado in Boulder in the late 1980s. Parker was studying film and Japanese. Stone was studying maths and film. The maths degree was to appease his father, who wanted him to study something practical, which I think is one of the most relatable details in this entire story. They were both fans of the same things: Monty Python's absurdist paper cutout animation, low-budget comedy that didn't apologize for itself, the kind of humor that makes you laugh and then feel slightly bad about laughing. They started making things together, short films, weird projects, things that mostly went nowhere in the traditional sense, but taught them how to do stuff quickly and cheaply. In 1992, they made a short animated film for their college film festival. It was called Jesus vs. Frosty, and it was made entirely out of construction paper, stop-motion photography, 4 small kids in a snowy town. Jesus, Frosty the Snowman as a creature of genuine menace, crude beyond description. They didn't put their names on it. They didn't put their names on it because they didn't think it mattered. It was a film festival entry. It was something they'd knocked together. They weren't expecting it to go anywhere. After university, they moved to Los Angeles and spent a few years living the way people live when they're trying to break into the film industry in their early 20s. They were crashing on friends' sofas, doing landscaping work, doing production assistant work, sharing a 1985 Buick. Their main completed project at that point was a feature film called Cannibal, the musical which they had made at university and were screening at festivals and in small venues around the city. It's exactly what it sounds like. At one of those screenings, a Fox television executive named Brian Graydon saw it. He liked them. He asked them if they had anything else he could look at. The only thing they could show him was Jesus versus Frosty. Graydon loved it. He found it genuinely funny in a way he hadn't quite seen before. Little kid voices and cute paper cutout animation saying things that were comprehensively inappropriate. He asked if he could use it as his personal Christmas card to send out on VHS to his friends. Parker and Stone said yes, because why wouldn't you? In 1995, Graydon paid them $2,000 to make a new version, a more polished follow-up that he could send out that Christmas. The budget they actually spent was $750. They kept the rest, which feels very on-brand for the people who would later create Eric Cartman. The new short was called Jesus vs. Santa. And here's the thing about Jesus vs. Santa that makes it genuinely extraordinary in retrospect. Watching it now, it is unmistakably South Park. The characters have the same flat paper cutout design, the same limited movement, the same voices, not exactly as they'd become in the series, but recognizably heading there. Kyle is already Jewish. There's already a rat eating what appears to be Kenny. There's a sign at the edge of town that reads South Park. And in a brief background shot, there's a small figure that appears to be Wendy Testaberger sitting on Santa's lap before the show existed, before it had an order, before anyone was paying attention. Parker and Stone, again, did not put their names on it. Graydon sent the tape to about 35 friends. He deliberately did not send it to anyone at a major studio because he thought the content would offend them. He was probably right. The 35 people who received it loved it enough to copy it. Those copies went to more friends. Those friends made more copies. There is a rumor, repeated often enough that it has taken on the quality of legend, that George Clooney received a copy and was so enthusiastic about it that he personally duplicated it 300 times and distributed those copies to people he knew. Whether or not the number 300 is accurate, Clooney has never denied being an early champion of the tape, and Parker has repeated the story in interviews with obvious pleasure. The tape spread through Hollywood and through college campuses in a way that nobody had engineered and nobody had anticipated. This was the internet era in the sense that the internet existed, but not in the sense that you could share a video clip on your phone in 5 seconds. This was a physical object being physically copied and physically handed to people. It went viral before the word viral meant that. Parker and Stone found out what had happened at a party. Someone was showing the tape, not knowing who'd made it. Parker told them he'd made it. The person said that wasn't possible because they knew the guys who made it, and those guys had just got a meeting with MTV. MTV passed. So did Fox at a network level. Although something interesting happened there that doesn't get enough attention. Graydon had moved over to Fox, and he began developing a television series based on the South Park characters. They went far enough down that road to make a pilot. A kid's pilot, Graydon has said, which is a sentence that requires a moment to sit with. The 4 boys from a VHS Christmas card that had been circulating underground for a year, developed as a children's television program. It didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen is Mr. Hanky the Christmas Poo, a talking sentient piece of excrement who visits children on Christmas Eve and delivers presents. Fox's development team could not get past this character. Every time Mr. Hanky came up in discussions, the conversation stopped. Comedy Central had no such hesitation. Comedy Central looked at this entire project, the underground tape, the devoted following, the talking poo, and said yes to all of it, so the show the whole world knows exists on Comedy Central instead of Fox because of one character. A character who is, when you think about it, exactly the kind of thing that was always going to separate the networks willing to take a risk from the ones that weren't. There's one more detail from this origin story that I think deserves a moment. The Jesus vs. Santa tape, the one that went viral on VHS, was also included as a hidden file on the first 100,000 pressings of Tiger Woods 99 for PlayStation. You could access it from the game disk on a PC buried in a file called zizdummy.dat. Electronic Arts found out and recalled the game in January 1999. The tape had been accidentally distributed inside a golf video game to an entirely different audience who had no idea what they were about to find. Nothing about this show's origins involved anything going according to plan, not a single part of it. and I think that matters in a way we'll keep coming back to tonight. Here's something that people who love South Park often know in a vague way but don't fully sit with. The original broadcast pilot. Cartman gets an anal probe. The first episode that aired on Comedy Central in August 1997 was made with actual construction paper, not a digital imitation of construction paper, not an animation style inspired by construction paper. Actual physical sheets of construction paper cut up, arranged, and photographed frame by frame using genuine stop-motion photography. Every character, every background, every movement, paper. It took 3 months to complete. 3 months for a single 22-minute episode. I want you to hold that number for a second, because in a later section, we're going to talk about how long South Park episodes take to make now. And the contrast is genuinely staggering. The pilot cost somewhere in the range of $250,000 to $300,000. Comedy Central looked at the finished episode, loved it, ordered a series, and then told Parker and Stone very directly that they could not make the show this way. The pace was completely unsustainable. You cannot run a television series on a 3-month production cycle for 22 minutes of content. The maths simply don't work. So Parker and Stone, with their small team, had to figure out how to make the same show in a fraction of the time. And the solution they arrived at is one of the more quietly brilliant things in the history of animated television. They built a digital animation pipeline specifically engineered to look like the cheap paper cutout aesthetic, not to transcend it, not to improve on it, to imitate it. Every visual quality that makes South Park look like South Park, the flat perspective, the jerky limited movement, the slightly rough edges, the sense that everything has been cut out with not entirely precise scissors. None of that is a limitation of the technology. It is the technology performing a limitation on purpose. The early seasons used CorelDRAW and Alias Power Animator running on Silicon Graphics workstations. From season 5 onward, the show transitioned to Autodesk Maya, the same software used for high-end visual effects in feature films, and has used it ever since. Modern visual effects in South Park are generated with Apple Motion. What this means in practical terms is that every episode after the original pilot is a sophisticated computer animation production pretending to be children playing with paper. The visual simplicity of South Park is a deliberate aesthetic choice supported by an extremely capable production pipeline. There's a version of this show that could look like anything, rendered with all the polish of a Pixar film, and Parker and Stone have consistently, actively chosen for it to look the way it looks instead. I find that genuinely interesting as a creative decision. The roughness isn't accidental, it's protected. The show guards its own lo-fi aesthetic because that aesthetic is part of what the show is saying about itself. We're not trying to impress you with the visuals, the words are the point, the ideas are the point. The crudeness is a kind of argument. The original pilot also has a distinction that gets mentioned occasionally but never quite given the weight it deserves. South Park was the first weekly television series ever to receive a TVMA rating, not just on Comedy Central, on any network, anywhere. The TVMA rating as applied to a weekly broadcast series had never existed before this show made it necessary. That feels almost quaint now, in an era where much more extreme content exists on every streaming platform. But in 1997, on basic cable, a weekly animated show aimed at adults carrying the most restrictive content rating on television was a genuinely novel thing. The rating was created for it, or at minimum, it was the first show to wear it weekly. The original broadcast pilot also features a slightly different version of the show than the one audiences eventually settled into. The theme was slower. Claypool's recording existed but hadn't been sped up to its final tempo yet. The boys' voices were slightly different. They'd been through the recording process but not yet through the iterations that would define them. And the paper aesthetic in those early construction paper shots has a particular texture that the digital imitation, for all its skill, never fully captured. There's a version of the pilot that exists separately from the broadcast version. an earlier cut that's been seen by relatively few people. Trey Parker has called the whole experience of making the pilot on construction paper an act of insanity in hindsight, but also said he wouldn't undo it. The pilot looks the way it looks. The show looks the way it looks. The decision to honor that aesthetic in digital form for the next 27 plus years is one of the more consistently kept promises in television history. Now, all of that physical paper and 3-month production time got compressed into something else entirely. Something that, once it was in place, became one of the most remarkable production machines in television. But before we get to how the show gets made now, I want to talk about the thing that plays before every episode starts. Because the South Park theme song has a history that most people don't know, and one version of it contains a substitution that I genuinely love. The South Park theme was written and performed by Les Claypool, the bassist and frontman of Primus. If you know Primus, this makes complete sense. If you don't know Primus, they're an American rock band with a sound that occupies a very specific corner of musical strangeness. Funky, weird, slightly unsettling, technically impressive, but wearing its technique lightly. Claypool's bass playing is distinctive enough to be immediately recognizable. Once you know he did the South Park theme, you can't unhear the Primusness of it. The theme runs at exactly 144 beats per minute. That's slightly faster than a resting heartbeat. Not fast enough to be energizing, not slow enough to feel ponderous. Just that edge of propulsion that makes the opening credits feel like they're heading somewhere without being in any kind of rush to get there. Whether that was a conscious decision or a happy accident, I genuinely don't know. But it's one of those details that explains why the theme works as well as it does. Here's what most people don't know about the theme. It's had 5 distinctly different versions across the show's history, and each one tells you something about what was happening with the show at that moment. Version 1 is the original, seasons 1 through mid-season 4. The classic call and response between Claypool and the 4 boys, each one getting a verse, the voices layered together at the end. This is the version that most people think of when they think of the theme. It's the one that was playing on Comedy Central when the show first built its audience. There's a small detail inside version 1 that almost nobody mentions. During season 3, the boys' vocals in the theme were re-recorded at a slightly higher pitch. The actors' voices were already beginning to change as they got older, and the original recordings were starting to sound mismatched. So they went back in and redid the vocals before the sonic drift became too noticeable. The theme sounds continuous across the early seasons, but the version from season 3 onward is subtly different from the version that opened season 1. Version 2 arrived around mid-season 4 and is called formally the 4th grade theme. It was a techno and breakbeat remix done by someone named Paul Robb. The acoustic guitars were replaced entirely. It ran for roughly half a season and was then quietly retired. Most casual viewers have absolutely no memory of it existing. If you were watching the show at that point and noticed the theme was different, you were paying more attention than most. It's not bad, exactly. It just sounds like season 4 trying something out and then changing its mind. Version 3 is the one I find most interesting, and it's the one most people have forgotten about. Seasons 6 through 10, a twangy, country-inspired, slightly bluegrass arrangement. Slower, more textured, and during season 6 specifically, there was a change to who sang Kenny's part. At the end of season 5, Kenny had been killed off, not in the usual way, not the weekly death that everyone ignores. Parker and Stone had decided to actually remove him from the show for a while, so Kenny was genuinely gone from season 6 onward for most of the season. He wouldn't return properly until season 7. The theme still had to run. The theme had always had Kenny's verse, and Kenny's verse in the theme was performed in his characteristic, completely muffled voice, his words buried so far inside the parka hood that nobody could quite make them out. So they gave Kenny's verse to Timmy. Timmy Birch, the boy with a disability who communicates almost exclusively by shouting his own name, sang Kenny's part of the South Park theme for the duration of Kenny's absence. If you watch the season 6 opening credits, you can hear it. Timmy's distinctive voice filling the space where Kenny should be. It's a very South Park solution to a very specific problem. Your theme has a part for a character who currently doesn't exist, so you give that part to the character who can only say his own name. Version 4 arrived around season 10 and has been the primary theme ever since, though it's evolved somewhat. Claypool returned and re-recorded using a custom instrument he'd built called the whamala, a single-string electric bass that's played with a bow rather than plucked. The sound is harder, more rock-adjacent, with an energy that feels different from the earlier versions without losing the fundamental Primus DNA. Version 5 is a relative newcomer. Season 25 featured a full orchestral arrangement of the theme. The whole thing re-recorded with a live orchestra, strings and brass and everything, and notably incorporating the uncensored version of Kenny's lyrics, which is interesting in its own right, because Kenny's lyrics in the theme are not, it turns out, innocent. Fans have decoded what Kenny says in the theme over the years, and the consensus is that it's fairly graphic. Various analyses of the muffled audio have produced transcriptions that include Kenny saying things that would not make it past a broadcast standards meeting if they were clearly audible. The show has been playing these allegedly very rude lyrics before every single episode, buried in a muffled voice that most people simply process as musical texture for the better part of 3 decades. I don't know for certain that the transcriptions are accurate. Parker and Stone have never confirmed them officially, but they've also never denied them, and given everything we know about how this show operates, the idea that Kenny's theme lyrics are something the writers quietly found hilarious is extremely consistent with the available evidence. There's something I can enjoy about that, actually. The show opens with a muffled joke that a significant proportion of its audience has heard hundreds of times without ever catching. Whether you find it or not, it was always there. The theme's various versions also track something interesting about the show's public identity at different moments. The original Primus version is anarchic and lo-fi, consistent with a show that was being described as dangerous and offensive and genuinely new. The Bluegrass version, which arrived during a more experimental period, has a slightly more self-aware quality. There's a wink in the acoustic twang that the original didn't need. The Wamola version is harder, more confident, playing less like an indie discovery and more like a show that knows it's been around for a decade and isn't particularly apologetic about it. The orchestral arrangement from season 25, with its full strings and brass, sounds like a show that has outlived most of its critics, which at that point it had. Now, since we're already talking about Kenny, and since that muffled voice and what it might be hiding feels like the right way into this next part, let's talk about what's actually going on with Kenny McCormick, because for about 6 or 7 seasons, the show let you assume that his weekly deaths were just a running gag. And then it showed you something underneath that gag that is genuinely one of the darker pieces of mythology in the show's entire run. For the first several seasons of South Park, Kenny dying was purely comedy. He'd be hit by a bus, struck by lightning, fall into something, spontaneously combust, get eaten by something that didn't normally eat people. And then Stan would say, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." And Kyle would say, "You bastards." And next episode, Kenny would be at the bus stop again, alive and wearing the same parka. And nobody would ever acknowledge what had happened. It was a recurring structural joke that the show executed with creative variation for years without ever explaining it. Most viewers accepted this completely. It was just part of the DNA. Kenny dies. That's his thing. It didn't require explanation any more than Cartman being selfish required explanation, or Randy doing something stupid required explanation. Some things on South Park just were what they were. And then, around season 14, something changed. The Coon and Friends trilogy. The boys form a superhero team, each one taking on a costume and a persona. Cartman is the Coon, which he insists on, and everyone else finds embarrassing. And Kenny is Mysterian. Now, Mysterian is different from the other kid heroes in one specific way. He seems to actually mean it. While the other boys are quite clearly just children wearing homemade costumes, Mysterion has a quality of genuine seriousness that doesn't quite fit. There's a scene in these episodes where Mysterion stands in front of his friends and tells them plainly that he cannot die. He explains that he has died before many times and that every time he comes back, nobody remembers it happened. His friends don't believe him. They think he's exaggerating or making something up for effect. So Kenny, standing right there in front of them, pulls out a gun and shoots himself in the head. They're screaming, genuinely horrified, crying. It's as upsetting as South Park can make something, which is more upsetting than you'd expect from a show that's made a joke out of this character dying for over a decade. The next day, Kenny wakes up in his bed. He goes to school, he sees his friends. Not a single one of them has any memory of what happened. The cycle is complete. What gets me about that scene is what it actually describes. It's not the dying that's the tragedy. Kenny has clearly made a kind of peace with the dying. It's the isolation. He goes through something genuinely terrible, repeatedly, and the people he's closest to have no record of it. He witnesses his own death from the inside, and then has to go back to school and pretend everything is normal and nobody will ever understand why he sometimes seems like he's carrying something heavy. The show goes further than this. Kenny confronts his parents about something called the Cult of Cthulhu, and his parents, Stuart and Carol McCormick, confirm it. Yes, they attended a cult meeting dedicated to the Lovecraftian entity Cthulhu. Yes, their participation in this cult has condemned their son to an endless cycle of dying and being reborn. They're sorry about it. The reason they attended the cult meeting in the first place? Free beer. That's it. Kenny's parents joined a Cthulhu cult for free beer, and their son has been paying the price ever since. It is simultaneously one of the bleakest and most perfectly South Park explanations for anything in the show's history. The cosmic horror and the mundane alcoholism of it sit together so comfortably that it somehow makes the tragedy worse. The trilogy closes with a scene that is genuinely one of the most affecting things the show has ever produced. Kenny has died again, come back again, nobody remembers again. Exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with physical tiredness, he tells his friends he's tired and wants to go to bed. He says goodnight. And then he shoots himself again. His friends are horrified, all over again. They will have forgotten by morning. Cut to Kenny's house. His mother jolts awake in bed, clutching her stomach, crying out in pain. She says, and I'm not paraphrasing very much here, "It's happening again." In the next shot, she is placing a newborn baby, dressed in a tiny orange parka, into a crib. She turns to her husband and says, with what sounds like genuine regret, "We never should have gone to that stupid cult meeting." That line changes the entire history of the character in a single sentence. Every Kenny death across every previous season, played for laughs and quickly forgotten, is now something else. It's a cycle that has been running since before the show began. It will keep running. And the only person who knows about it can't tell anyone. There's a fan theory that gets discussed around this material that has never been confirmed, but has also never really been denied. In an earlier episode, Cartman receives a corneal transplant using Kenny's eye. The theory holds that this gave Cartman some partial, occasional connection to Kenny's experience. Not full awareness, not understanding, but flashes of something. It would explain certain moments scattered across later seasons where Cartman displays an unusual insight into Kenny's situation, or an unusual tenderness toward him that doesn't fit with Cartman's normal patterns of behavior. Is this true? No one has said so officially. Has it been denied? Also, no. And that's one of those gaps the show leaves deliberately open, I think. It rewards people who are watching carefully without ever committing to an answer that would close the question down. What really stays with me about all of this is the retroactive weight it puts on something the show spent years treating as disposable. The running gag wasn't just a gag, it was the surface layer of something much quieter and much darker. Kenny has been trapped in a Lovecraftian nightmare for the entire run of this show. and the show spent a decade pretending it was just a funny bit about a kid in an orange coat. Whether that was planned from the beginning or discovered along the way, I genuinely couldn't tell you. Probably a bit of both, knowing how this show operates. But it doesn't really matter in the end. The mythology landed. And once it's there, you can't watch the early seasons the same way. The real tragedy of Kenny McCormick isn't the dying, it's the loneliness of being the only one who knows. Season 1 of South Park ended on a genuine 2-part mystery. The question was, who is Eric Cartman's father? Multiple candidates had been established across the season. Leanne Cartman, Eric's mother, had apparently slept with most of the men in South Park at one point or another. A running gag that had accumulated into a genuine roster of potential paternal candidates. The episode built toward the revelation, cut to black, and told viewers to come back next week for the answer. Which would have been fine as cliffhangers go, except for one thing. Parker and Stone hadn't decided on the answer yet. This is not speculation. They've confirmed it. When the season 1 finale aired, they genuinely did not know who Cartman's father was going to be. They had a cliffhanger and no resolution. The season 2 premiere, which was supposed to answer the question, became a problem as soon as it was time to actually write it. Their solution was remarkable in its audacity. The season 2 premiere, which aired in April, which happened to be close to April Fool's Day, opened not with the Cartman's father resolution, but with 45 minutes of Terrence and Phillip. Terrence and Phillip are the in-universe Canadian comedy duo that the South Park parents famously disapprove of. A show within the show specifically designed to represent the kind of crude, lowbrow humor that South Park's own critics accuse South Park of being. The whole episode was Terrence and Phillip fart jokes, nothing else. No plot continuation, no resolution, just relentless Terrence and Phillip content, while Parker and Stone figured out what they were actually going to do. Comedy Central received an enormous number of complaints. Fans were furious. People who'd been genuinely invested in the mystery and turned on their televisions expecting resolution got 45 minutes of fart jokes from 2 cartoon Canadians instead. The outrage was real. Parker and Stone have maintained that this was deliberate. They needed more time, they saw an opportunity to troll the audience about the exact kind of lowbrow humor criticism the show was receiving, and they took it. Whether the April Fool's framing was planned from the start or was retroactively applied to justify a delay, the result was an episode that is now genuinely famous as a piece of calculated audience provocation. When the actual resolution arrived, it was this. Leanne Cartman is a hermaphrodite. She is both Cartman's mother and Cartman's father. The entire mystery, the full roster of South Park men who might be responsible, was a red herring. There was only ever one parent. The reveal landed. It was strange enough and specific enough to feel like a genuine South Park answer rather than a lazy one. And it closed the question, or appeared to close it, for several seasons. But here's the thing that makes this arc so much more interesting looking back from a later vantage point. The resolution to the who is Cartman's father question that arrived in season 2 is not, as it turns out, the whole story. There is a second layer to Cartman's parentage that the show planted in season 5 and didn't acknowledge as such for nearly a decade. We'll get to that when we talk about Scott Tenorman Must Die a bit later. But for now, the important thing to understand about the Cartman's dad arc is what it reveals about how this show has always operated. Parker and Stone are not planners in the traditional television sense. They don't develop multi-season arcs in writers' rooms and map out reveals years in advance. They write quickly, respond to what's working, change course when something isn't, and occasionally end up with a cliffhanger they haven't thought through. The show is alive in a way that most television isn't, precisely because the production cycle is so short that there's no time to over-engineer things. Sometimes that produces brilliance. Occasionally, it produces an April Fool's episode made of Canadian fart jokes. What I find genuinely interesting about the Cartman's dad situation is the decision to troll rather than apologize. Most shows in that position, having hyped a mystery and then discovered they don't have an answer, would have quietly produced something mediocre that technically resolved the question. Parker and Stone instead made the delay into a joke at their own expense, and at the audience's expense, and at the expense of the entire concept of television cliffhangers. The trolling was the content. That instinct to turn the problem into the joke is one of the most consistent creative signatures the show has. It shows up again and again across the history of South Park. The show doesn't hide its limitations, it performs them. There's a meta quality to the April Fool's episode that's easy to miss if you encounter it as a curiosity rather than in its original context. The Terrence and Phillip episode was the show commenting on criticism of itself using the thing it was being criticized for as the vehicle for the delay it needed. Critics had been saying South Park was just crude humor with no substance. So Parker and Stone responded to having no answer for their cliffhanger by making the most purely crude, purely substanceless episode they could, and making that the content. The criticism became the alibi, the limitation became the statement. The show has done versions of this many times since. Simpsons already did it, from season 6, is an entire episode built around the anxiety that everything South Park might do has already been done by The Simpsons, an anxiety the writers evidently had turned into a joke at their own expense. Resolved by having the character most consumed by that anxiety decide it doesn't matter because South Park is South Park and The Simpsons is The Simpsons. The self-awareness isn't decorative, it's structural. The show uses its own neuroses as raw material. The Cartman's dad arc started that pattern in a way by establishing that Parker and Stone were willing to be honest about working without a net. They didn't pretend the April Fool's episode was planned. They let the audience understand what had happened. And then they delivered an answer that was genuinely strange enough to have been worth waiting for. The hermaphrodite reveal is not a great answer, exactly, but it's a South Park answer. It's weirder than anything the audience was expecting. And that particular variety of weird, not random, not arbitrary, but specific and committed to its own internal logic, is what the show does when it's operating well. There's a version of the Stan and Kyle dynamic that you can read as two friends just being two friends, bouncing off each other, doing the thing that best friends do. And then there's the version where you know that Stan is Trey Parker and Kyle is Matt Stone, and suddenly the entire dynamic has this extra layer of autobiography running through it. Parker has confirmed it straightforwardly. Stan Marsh is based on him. The connection goes beyond personality. It's built into the details of the world. Stan's father, Randy, is named after Trey Parker's real father, Randy Parker. Stan's mother, Sharon, is named after his real mother, Erin Parker. Randy's profession in the show, he's a geologist, is what Trey's real father actually did for a living. When Stan has those moments of sincere, slightly pained engagement with the world, when he looks at something absurd or cruel and expresses genuine disgust, that's Parker putting a version of himself on screen and letting him react the way Parker would react. Kyle Broflovsky is Matt Stone, Jewish, morally earnest, frequently right, and almost always ignored for it, equipped with a temper that fires in proportion to how obvious it is that everyone around him is being an idiot. Stone grew up in Colorado and has described Kyle as a fairly direct self-portrait in terms of the character's role in the group dynamic. Eric Cartman is a more complicated case. Parker has described him as a composite, part Archie Bunker from the 1970s American sitcom All in the Family. That particular combination of narrow worldview and charismatic delivery that somehow makes people listen to someone saying things they shouldn't be listening to. And part a real person, a kid from Parker's childhood who had that quality of weaponized selfishness, who could make being awful seem almost logical if you were in the same room as him. What's interesting about Cartman as a character is that he has accumulated more genuine mythology over the course of the show than any of the other boys. His parentage, his psychology, his specific brand of evil. The show has returned to Cartman's backstory and deepened it more than anyone else's. Partly because he's the most dramatically useful character, and partly because Parker seems genuinely fascinated by him in a way that keeps producing new material. Kenny McCormick's origins are perhaps the most touching of the four. Parker grew up in Conifer, Colorado, not far from the real South Park basin that the fictional town is modeled on. In his neighborhood, there was a kid named Kenny. This kid was very poor, wore an orange parka that was significantly too large for him, with the hood pulled up in such a way that you could never quite see his face. He would sometimes miss school for long stretches and would disappear and then reappear. And nobody in the neighborhood ever seemed to make much of it. He'd just be gone, and then he'd be back and life would continue without comment. The Kenny disappears and nobody remarks on it energy of the real-world Kenny fed directly into the television Kenny situation. A child whose absence goes unacknowledged, whose returns are unremarkable, whose existence doesn't register in quite the way everyone else's does. Parker took that real quality and built an entire mythology around it, though I don't imagine the real Kenny McCormick has ever been informed of this particular honor. The Spirit of Christmas short we talked about earlier was the first appearance of these characters, and it already contained something interesting. In the background of one of its scenes, there's a small figure that appears to be Wendy Testaberger sitting on Santa's lap. Before the show had a name, before it had been pitched or ordered or developed. Wendy was there in the short, before anyone watching it had any idea that there would be a show, and therefore no idea that there would be a character named Wendy who would have an on-again, off-again relationship with Stan across many seasons. Whether this was intentional foreshadowing or a character design that Parker and Stone already had in mind and slipped into the background, I don't know. But she's there. There's one more character detail worth talking about here. Butters Stotch. Butters, for anyone who needs reminding, is the perpetually cheerful, perpetually put-upon boy who exists at the edges of the main group and has gradually accumulated one of the show's most devoted fan followings. What most people don't know is that Butters almost didn't make it. In the early seasons, Butters existed as a background character, part of the ensemble of kids at school, not particularly prominent. When the show was considering expanding its focus beyond the core four boys, Butters was one of several candidates. The other main candidate was a character called Pip, a British boy modeled on Dickensian archetypes who appeared periodically in early seasons. The show was going to elevate one of them to a more prominent role. They chose Butters. Pip continued to appear occasionally and was then, in an episode called 201, killed by Micah Streisand during a fight scene without particular ceremony, in a moment that felt very much like the show closing the door on a character who hadn't found his purpose. Butters, meanwhile, became one of the most beloved characters in the show's history. His combination of genuine cheerfulness, complete inability to understand why the world is unkind to him, and the absolute confidence with which he does. Impressions of his alter ego, Professor Chaos, make him the specific kind of character that a show stumbles into rather than designs. He's too specific to have been engineered. He was found. The town itself has a real-world basis. The fictional South Park sits in a version of Park County, Colorado, modeled on the South Park Basin and the area around the real town of Fairplay. Parker grew up in this part of Colorado, and the specificity of certain details in the town's geography and atmosphere, the mountains that hem everything in, the particular quality of a mountain town small community where everyone knows everyone, comes from genuine familiarity with the landscape. It's worth sitting with the autobiographical roots of the show for a moment, because I think it changes how you relate to Parker and Stone's commentary on the world. When Stan reacts to something with disgust and confusion, that's Parker doing it. When Kyle argues that the obvious right thing is being ignored by everyone around him, that's Stone doing it. The two boys at the center of the show aren't constructs, they're portraits. And the fact that both of those portraits have been in 4th grade for nearly 30 years, permanently suspended in childhood, is either the most poetic or the most convenient creative decision in the show's history, depending on how you want to look at it. There are 5 episodes of South Park that you cannot currently watch on any major streaming platform. They exist on physical media in some regions, they exist in fan archives. But if you open Paramount Plus or any of the other official distribution channels and look for them, they're not there. They've been removed. And the story of how and why those episodes disappeared is one of the more uncomfortable chapters in the show's history. Not because South Park was in the wrong, necessarily, but because of what the removal reveals about the relationship between creative freedom and institutional fear. The story begins relatively quietly in Season 5. An episode called Super Best Friends depicted the Prophet Muhammad as a member of a team of religious superheroes alongside Jesus, Buddha, Moses, Joseph Smith, and others. The episode aired in 2001 without meaningful incident. Muhammad was depicted as a hero. The context was clearly satirical and affectionate rather than hostile. Nobody made much of it at the time. It stayed in circulation for years after that, which is relevant context for what came later. In Season 10, the show returned to the Muhammad question directly, but this time not as a background detail. Cartoon Wars is a 2-part episode that is explicitly about whether Comedy Central will allow South Park to depict Muhammad on screen. The episode is about television censorship in a very specific and very deliberate way. It's a show about a show deciding what it's allowed to show. Parker and Stone depicting their own network's editorial process in real time on that network and asking the audience to watch it happen. Comedy Central's response to this episode was to censor it. The image of Muhammad was replaced with a black screen. The show was critiquing censorship, and the network responded by censoring it. Parker and Stone have never been particularly quiet about how they felt about this. Stone, in particular, has spoken about it in terms that make clear the frustration hasn't faded with time. Then came 200 and 201 in Season 14. These are almost certainly the most ambitious and most consequential episodes the show ever produced, and they are also the episodes that are most thoroughly unavailable. 200 was a kind of retrospective. It pulled together nearly every celebrity and controversy the show had touched over its first 200 episodes and built them into a single plot. 201 was the resolution. Both episodes revisited the Muhammad question, this time as their central concern. After 201 aired, an organization with connections to radical groups posted what authorities and the network interpreted as a credible threat against Parker and Stone specifically. This was not vague online hostility, it was specific enough to be taken seriously. Comedy Central's response was to heavily censor 201, adding audio bleeps and visual obscuring to sections of the episode. They did this without informing Parker and Stone. Parker and Stone found out when the episode aired, and they watched what had been done to it. The bleeps were not limited to the content that had generated the threat. They were applied to dialogue that had nothing to do with the controversy. A closing speech, written as a summation of the episode's themes, was bleeped in its entirety, covering words that were not offensive, removing content that was not the source of the controversy, making the speech into a series of sounds that communicated nothing. It was censorship in the shape of censorship, applied past the point of any editorial logic. Parker responded by noting publicly that the bleeped speech was not saying anything offensive, that the bleeps were covering standard English words, that the censorship had stopped making sense and was simply happening because someone had panicked. 201 has never been officially rebroadcast. Neither 200 nor 201 are available on streaming platforms. Super Best Friends was pulled from circulation following the fallout from these episodes, despite having aired for nearly a decade without incident. Cartoon Wars Parts 1 and 2 are also unavailable on most platforms. 5 episodes, gone from the place where everything else exists. The China situation is somewhat different in character, but similarly illuminating about the relationship between the show and the institutions around it. In 2019, Season 23 included an episode called Banned in China, which satirized Hollywood studios self-censoring their content to maintain access to the Chinese market. The episode included a depiction of Winnie the Pooh, the children's character that has been used in China as a caricature of Xi Jinping, and which has in various forms been restricted or banned there. The response was immediate and comprehensive. Every episode of South Park, every clip, every search result, every discussion of the show was simultaneously removed from every major Chinese internet platform. Baidu, Sina Weibo, Bilibili, Douban, WeChat, all of it scrubbed within hours. The speed of it was almost impressive. A coordinated platform-level response to a single episode of an animated comedy executed faster than most government agencies can schedule a meeting. Parker & Stone's official response was a statement that read, in its entirety, "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She doesn't look like Winnie the Pooh at all. Tune into our 300th episode this Wednesday at 10. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May the golden skies of China be filled with rolls and rolls of buttery, sour, sweet pork." They did not apologize. They wrote what Eric Cartman would write if Eric Cartman had been given a geopolitical press release to draft, and they posted it as their official response to a state censorship action. The show remains comprehensively unavailable in China. Parker & Stone have never expressed any regret about this outcome. South Park is effectively banned in India as well by a 2010 order from the Ministry of Broadcasting, though Netflix India acquired streaming rights in 2019 with an 18+ rating. What all of this adds up to, when you look at it together, is a show that has consistently created situations in which someone with power over distribution has had to decide whether the content was worth the difficulty it caused. Sometimes the answer has been no. Sometimes the answer has been yes, with modifications the show didn't agree to. And sometimes, as with the Chinese response, the show has taken the position that the controversy itself is the point, and the removal is simply the cost of making the point. The 5 unavailable episodes represent the moments where that calculation came out differently. They're still the show. They're still South Park. They're just not where everything else is. Jerome McElroy, Chef, was voiced by Isaac Hayes from the very first episode of South Park in 1997. Hayes was, at that point, already a legendary figure. He'd written and performed the theme from Shaft. He'd been part of Stax Records in Memphis during one of the most important periods in American soul music. He was enormously respected, enormously talented, and he brought something to Chef that the character genuinely needed: warmth. Real, palpable warmth. In a show built on cynicism and shock, Chef was the person in the children's lives who gave them actual affection. He sang to them, he cooked for them, he gave them advice about women and life in general that was usually inappropriate and occasionally wise. For 9 seasons, Chef worked. He worked because Hayes meant it. You could hear it in the performance. The voice wasn't just covering the lines, it was inhabiting the character with a generosity that elevated everything around it. And then, in early 2006, Isaac Hayes left. The official explanation was a statement attributed to Hayes, which expressed his objection to the show's treatment of religion. He described South Park as having a history of ridiculing religion in a way he found personally offensive, and he said he could no longer be part of it in good conscience. The timing was notable. The season 9 episode Trapped in the Closet had aired a few months earlier, an episode that was explicitly and precisely a satire of Scientology, depicting its beliefs and practices in considerable detail, naming Tom Cruise and John Travolta, and ending with the show's characters defying legal threats from a church. Isaac Hayes was, and had long been, a member of the Church of Scientology. Parker & Stone's public response was measured but pointed. Stone noted, in what I think was one of the more diplomatically precise things he's ever said in public, that Isaac Hayes had never expressed any concern about the show's treatment of Christianity, or Islam, or Judaism, or Mormonism, or any other religion the show had satirized across the previous 9 seasons. The objection had arrived specifically and only when the satirized religion was Scientology. The implication of that sequence of events was left, quite deliberately, for the audience to draw its own conclusion. Here's the detail that doesn't get enough attention in most accounts of this departure. Isaac Hayes suffered a stroke in January 2006. He was hospitalized. The stroke left him with impairments, and by multiple accounts from people who were close to him at that time, his condition was serious enough to raise genuine questions about his capacity during the period immediately following. The departure statement was issued shortly after the stroke. Several people with connections to Hayes have said, on the record, that the statement did not sound like him, that the language wasn't his, that the framing wasn't his, and that given his health in that period, it was not clear to people who knew him that the statement had been fully his own. Hayes died in August 2008, 2 years after the departure. He never publicly revisited or clarified the circumstances of the exit. Parker and Stone never made a definitive public statement about whether they believed the departure reflected Hayes' genuine wishes. They've been careful with that particular question, but what they did with the situation, how they wrote Chef's exit, contains a kind of editorial position that's hard to miss. The season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, dealt directly with his absence by having Chef return from a mysterious holiday that has apparently brainwashed him into a different person. He has joined a group called the Super Adventure Club, whose members he now defends and promotes with an uncanny lack of his previous warmth. He says things that sound wrong coming from him. He behaves in ways that feel like a performance of Chef, rather than Chef himself. The voice throughout this episode is Isaac Hayes, assembled entirely from spliced recordings of his previous work on the show. Old lines, repurposed and resequenced, cut together to make new sentences Hayes had never actually recorded as such. The show literally constructed a version of its own character out of pieces of his archived performances. And then Chef falls off a bridge, is impaled on the rocks below, catches fire, is mauled by a mountain lion, is attacked by a bear, and is defecated upon, all more or less simultaneously. It is one of the most comprehensively violent deaths in the show's history, which is saying something given the show's relationship with death generally. The episode ends with the boys grieving and then arriving at a conclusion that the show presents with genuine sincerity. They're going to remember Chef as he was, not as the person he became at the end, under what they characterize as external manipulation. They're separating the person from the circumstances of the exit. Whether that's generous or pointed depends on your reading of the Hayes situation. It could be the show saying, we honor what he gave us, we're angry about how it ended, and we're going to deal with both of those things at once. It could be something sharper. Most likely it's both, operating simultaneously, the way a lot of things in South Park operate. What the episode is absolutely not is closure. The departure of Isaac Hayes from South Park remains one of those stories that has an official version and a less clear underneath, and the show responded to it by making both visible at once: the grief for the character who was lost and the complicated feelings about the circumstances under which he was lost. And then moving on, because the show always moves on. Chef's voice has never been recast. The character has appeared briefly in later material using the same archival splicing technique. He is still Jerome McElroy. He is still, technically, Isaac Hayes, just assembled from pieces, which is its own kind of sad poetry. Scott Tenorman Must Die is the 4th episode of Season 5, and it is the highest rated episode in the show's history on IMDb. 9.6 out of 10 from tens of thousands of ratings, which puts it in genuinely elite territory for any television episode, animated or otherwise. It's the episode most people point to when they want to explain what South Park is actually capable of when it decides to be dark. The surface story is a revenge plot. A high school boy named Scott Tenorman sells Cartman his pubic hair for $16.12, convincing him it's a rite of passage into manhood. Cartman, realizing he's been cheated and humiliated, spends the episode trying to get his money back through increasingly elaborate and unsuccessful schemes. Scott defeats him at each attempt, publicly humiliating him in front of their friends. And then Cartman executes a plan. He arranges for Scott's parents, Jack and Linda Tenorman, to be shot by a farmer whose property Scott has been sneaking onto. He has their bodies processed. He engineers a situation in which Scott unknowingly eats his own parents in the form of a chili. He arranges for Radiohead, the actual band who appear in Cameo, to arrive at the moment of revelation and mock Scott for crying over his dead parents. Scott weeps. Cartman licks his tears. Radiohead tells Scott that crying is bitchin', which is about as close to a burn as Tom York has ever delivered. The episode ends on Cartman's face, satisfied in a way that goes beyond anything the show had shown him feeling before. It works as a standalone piece of television. The escalation is earned, the darkness is deployed with precision. The Radiohead cameo is absurd and perfect. It became immediately and has remained one of those episodes that people use as evidence that this show has dimensions that its surface presentation doesn't advertise. But here's what the episode doesn't tell you, what it very quietly plants without comment, and what the show doesn't acknowledge for 9 more years. Jack Tenorman is Cartman's biological father. This isn't revealed in Scott Tenorman Must Die. It's confirmed in 201, the season 14 episode we discussed earlier, the one that's no longer available on streaming. The revelation is delivered during the Muhammad arc, somewhat buried in the chaos of everything else that episode is doing. Jack Tenorman, it turns out, was one of the real candidates for Cartman's paternity. He was Laine Cartman's actual secret. He was the real answer to the season 1 question that the season 2 premiere had technically resolved, but not truthfully resolved. So, in Scott Tenorman Must Die, Cartman arranged for his own father to be shot, had him processed into a chili, and fed him to his half-brother. The question that the show never fully answers, and I want to spend a moment with this because I think it's genuinely interesting, is whether Cartman knew. Did he know at the time he executed the plan that Jack Tenorman was his father? Did he find out afterward and say nothing? Or did he act on instinct, on a plan that was purely about humiliation and revenge, without awareness of the biological connection, and then discover the truth later in circumstances the show never fully depicted? The evidence inside the episodes doesn't close this question. Parker and Stone have not closed it publicly. The show put both pieces of information into the world, the season 5 revenge plot and the season 14 paternity reveal, and left the connection for the audience to make, without confirming what Cartman knew or when he knew it. And that ambiguity changes the moral weight of the episode depending on which version is true. If Cartman didn't know, then Scott Tenorman Must Die is a story about a genuinely disturbed child who went too far in a revenge fantasy. Cruel, yes, but operating without complete information about what he was actually doing. If Cartman did know, if he found out before the episode, if the plan was constructed with full awareness that he was engineering the death of his own father and the humiliation of his own half-brother, then the episode is something else entirely. Then it's a story about a child who experienced something that should have destroyed him and chose instead to turn it into a demonstration of power, who made the worst possible thing into the most Cartman possible response. I don't know which version is true. I'm not sure the show does either at this point. But the fact that both readings exist and that both of them are completely consistent with what's on screen is exactly the kind of hidden depth that makes Cartman the most written about character in the show. The Radiohead detail deserves a moment on its own, separate from the mythology. Parker and Stone wanted Radiohead specifically because the band had a reputation for seriousness, for melancholy, for not being the kind of act you'd expect to find mocking a child at a chili cook-off over his dead parents. The incongruity was the point. They rang Radiohead and asked. Radiohead agreed, apparently without much hesitation. Tom York delivered the "that's pretty bitchin" line in character with what sounds like genuine commitment to the absurdity. It's one of those celebrity cameos that works completely. Not because Radiohead are particularly funny, but because they're exactly the right kind of not funny for what the episode needed. The connection between Scott Tenorman Must Die and the Cartman's father arc is the most significant piece of long-term hidden storytelling in the show. More significant than most fans realize because the two pieces were planted 9 years apart across 14 seasons of television, and the show never announced the connection. It just put both things in the world and waited. Whether that was planned from season 5 or retrofitted in season 14, whether Cartman knew or didn't know, whether the chili was justice or patricide or both at once, these questions exist in the space the show left open, and they're more interesting unanswered than they would be if someone just confirmed the answer in an interview. Some things are better as questions. South Park seems to know this. Let's talk about the actual mechanics of how the show gets made, because it's one of the most extraordinary production stories in the history of television, and most people who know the headline, "They make each episode in a week," don't know what that actually means in practice. Most animated television series take 8 to 9 months per episode. That's the standard pipeline: concept development, script writing, storyboarding, voice recording, animation, editing, sound design, color grading, delivery. 8 or 9 months of work for 22 minutes of television. That's roughly true for The Simpsons, for Family Guy, for almost everything else at that level of production. South Park does it in 6 days. The cycle begins on Thursday morning. Parker and Stone sit down with a small group of writing consultants and start talking. Not writing yet, talking, pitching things at each other, testing ideas, looking for the thing that wants to be an episode this week. Parker has described this process as almost like prospecting. You're sifting through a lot of material, looking for something that has weight, that has a shape. By Thursday afternoon, Parker is drafting a script. Not an outline, not a treatment, a full script, beginning to end, written while the ideas are still generating. Animation begins on whatever pages exist because there isn't time to wait for the whole script. The animators are working from partial material, building sequences that Parker hasn't finished writing yet, trusting that the story will arrive before they need it. Approximately 70 people work on each episode. During production, they work weeks of 100 to 120 hours. That is not hyperbole. 120 hours across 6 days is roughly 20 hours a day, which means the people making the show are working essentially all of their waking hours during production weeks. There are accounts of animators sleeping at their desks, of Parker staying in the studio for multiple consecutive nights, of the entire building running at a pace that would be unsustainable for anyone doing it for the long term. On Wednesday evening, the finished episode is transmitted via satellite uplink to Comedy Central. The broadcast is at 10 p.m. Eastern. The episode sometimes arrives at the network hours before transmission. Sometimes it arrives much closer to that than hours. There have been episodes where editing was still happening while earlier segments of the show were airing. The documentary 6 Days to Air, which premiered on Comedy Central in 2011, followed the production of the season 15 premiere and is probably the best document of what this process actually looks like from the inside. It's worth finding if you haven't seen it. The people in it look like people who are engaged in something they genuinely love and are also deeply tired. Both of those things seem equally true throughout. Bill Hader, and best known to most people as a cast member and writer at Saturday Night Live, where he worked for 8 years, served as a consultant writer on South Park for 16 episodes between 2008 and 2009. He's talked in interviews about what it was like to walk into that building during production. The walls covered in character drawings and scrawled jokes. Parker, working at a pace that seemed from the outside to be genuinely unsustainable. The feeling that the show was being made in real time, that nothing was pre-planned further than a few hours in advance, and that somehow this was working. Hader has specifically described the experience as unlike anything else he'd encountered in television writing, and he was working at SNL at the time, which has its own reputation for high-pressure, last-minute production. South Park made SNL look leisurely, he said. Trey Parker has directed 317 episodes of South Park across 28 seasons. Matt Stone has directed 9. Parker wrote the script for the overwhelming majority of the show's entire run. This is not a television series in the conventional sense, with a writing staff and a team of directors and a production apparatus that can keep running if a key person is out. It is one person's artistic vision, supported by a large and skilled team, generated at a pace that shouldn't be possible. The machine has failed in small ways 3 times. A power outage delayed the season 17 premiere in 2013. The episode wasn't ready. The cause was electrical and the network had to scramble. COVID disrupted season 24 so severely that it was reduced to 2 long-form specials, which Parker and Stone made from their homes. And in 2025, season 27 missed a production deadline on one of its episodes. Parker and Stone issued a public apology. Given that the show had been running on this production model for over 2 decades with almost perfect reliability, a missed deadline in season 27 felt less like a failure and more like evidence of how extraordinary the previous record had been. The detail that I find most telling about how this show operates, the one that was revealed at San Diego Comic-Con in July 2025, which we touched on in the opening, is that Parker and Stone use fan wikis and fan forums to maintain continuity in their own show. They don't have an internal canon document. When they need to know what a minor character's job is or whether they've done a particular storyline before, they go to the internet. The fans are the official memory of South Park. The people who built it have outsourced continuity to the people who love it. There's something genuinely democratic about that, even if it's also slightly alarming from an archival standpoint. The lore doesn't belong to the studio. It belongs to the community that has been carefully watching and documenting for 28 years. There's a production detail from the very beginning of the show that connects to this. When Parker and Stone were trying to figure out how to make animated television quickly, they didn't consult a production manual or hire a studio consultant. They invented the system. They built a pipeline that had never existed before, designed to produce something in 6 days that previously took 9 months. And then they ran that pipeline for nearly 3 decades without ever writing down a comprehensive version of what they'd built or what their show contained. South Park is a show made entirely of instinct, speed, and the collective memory of the people who love it. The fact that it's been doing this consistently enough to produce over 330 episodes across 28 seasons while the creators themselves occasionally forget what they've already written is one of the more quietly astonishing things about it. The 6-day cycle, 70 people working 100+ hours a week, one man writing and directing the overwhelming majority of it, fan wikis doing the archival work, satellite transmissions arriving hours before broadcast, and the show keeps going. It's an absolutely unsustainable way to make television. It has been sustained for 28 years. Randy Marsh appears in the very first episode of South Park. He's Stan's dad, a geologist. He stands in scenes and reacts to things and says parent-type things and is, for the first several seasons, exactly as interesting as a background parent character needs to be, which is to say, not very. He's set dressing. He exists to give Stan a home to come back to and a father figure to be embarrassed by. He is fine. And then something happened. Parker and Stone started finding Randy funnier than they expected. The character began accumulating a particular kind of comic energy. The energy of a middle-aged man who is always, absolutely always certain that he is handling a situation correctly and who is also, absolutely always, handling it catastrophically wrong. Randy Marsh is a man of enormous confidence and essentially no wisdom, and the gap between those two things turned out to be comedically bottomless. By season 23, the show was described by Parker and Stone themselves as having Randy as its primary main character. Not Stan, not Cartman, Randy Marsh, the background dad from season 1 who nobody would have predicted becoming the show's lead over the course of 20 years. The Tegrity Farms arc, which began in season 22, gave Randy a sustained storyline to anchor. He moves the family to a farm in the countryside and begins growing cannabis. The farm becomes a running thread across multiple seasons. Randy's relationship with his crop is portrayed as a kind of passion project that has gradually consumed him completely, to the detriment of his family and his own stated values. A portrait of someone who believes they've found meaning in something and is using that belief to justify increasingly questionable behavior. There's a running joke across the Tegrity Farms material that Parker has acknowledged reflects something real about his own relationship with creative work. Randy keeps producing things he's genuinely proud of, keeps expecting recognition that doesn't come in the form he wants it, keeps taking actions that are ostensibly about integrity and that actually serve his ego. The self-awareness is there at some level. But Randy is never quite self-aware enough to change. It's one of Parker's most sustained pieces of autobiographical writing, dressed up in enough absurdity that you can mistake it for pure comedy if you're not paying attention. What's interesting about Randy's evolution is that it wasn't engineered. There's no account of Parker sitting down in season 3 and deciding that Randy Marsh would eventually carry the show. He kept being funny in ways the writers wanted to follow. And as we talked about earlier with the Cartman's dad situation, the 6-day cycle means you follow what's working immediately this week, without a committee deciding whether it fits the long-term plan. Randy worked, so they did more Randy. Randy's most famous episode, almost certainly, is The Losing Edge from season 9, in which the boys' Little League baseball team deliberately tries to lose games so they can stop playing baseball, while Randy gets increasingly drunk at the bleachers and starts getting into fights with other parents. The A-plot about the boys trying to escape the season and the B-plot about Randy's escalating brawling converge in a climax that has no thematic connection to anything serious whatsoever, and is purely about finding the funniest version of Randy's specific failure mode. It's a perfect episode, not because it says anything profound, because it commits completely to the bit and executes it with complete precision. Then there's Lord from season 18, in which Randy is revealed to be the New Zealand singer-songwriter Lord. Parker performs the songs himself, which he recorded as actual music before the episode aired. The songs are genuinely good, which makes the joke work on a level beyond the visual comedy. Randy Marsh, geologist and father of Stan, secretly produced an internationally successful pop music career because he wanted to feel free. It is extremely stupid and extremely specific, and I think about it more often than I probably should. The character that Parker has invested most of his own complicated feelings into across the show's full run is probably Cartman, but the character he's had the most sustained fun with, the one that has generated the most purely comic invention over the longest stretch of time, is Randy, a man who has been wrong about everything for 28 years and has never once considered that this might be a pattern. Stan has said in various episodes that his father is his greatest source of embarrassment and anxiety. That tracks. What's less obvious is that Randy is also, across many of those same seasons, one of his primary sources of love. Randy is a disaster and a buffoon, and occasionally something approaching a monster, and he is also clearly someone who loves his family in a way that he genuinely cannot express except through catastrophically misguided actions taken on their behalf. That combination, the disaster and the love, is what gives the character his staying power beyond the comedy. And honestly, the fact that this character, or this particular brand of confident, chaotic, lovable uselessness, was standing quietly in the background of season 1 being nobody's idea of a lead character and then gradually became the emotional and comedic center of the show's later seasons without anyone engineering it, is one of the better stories in South Park's own behind-the-scenes history. He was always there. It just took 20 years to see what he was. One more Randy detail that I think encapsulates something true about the character. In the season 18 episode, Cock Magic, which is exactly the kind of title that tells you where you are with this show, there's a subplot involving Randy that's ostensibly absurd, and that contains, buried inside the absurdity, a small observation about aging and irrelevance and the fear of no longer being interesting to people you love. It's a single beat, surrounded by comedy, delivered so quickly you could easily miss it. But it's there, and it's honest, and it's why Randy has continued to be worth writing. The show has always been good at that, putting something real inside something ridiculous, using the ridiculous as a container for the real. Randy is probably the fullest expression of that technique in the show's history. A character so consistently absurd that his occasional moments of genuine feeling land with far more weight than they would in a show that took itself seriously all the time. Al Gore first appeared in South Park in season 10 in an episode called ManBearPig. He arrives in South Park to warn the children about a terrifying creature he calls ManBearPig, half man, half bear, half pig. That he is serial about, he keeps insisting super serial. The children are annoyed and bored. The adults dismiss him. ManBearPig does not appear to actually exist. Al Gore is portrayed as a lonely, attention-seeking man whose environmental warnings are so hysterically delivered that nobody can take them seriously, and who may be manufacturing a monster to make himself feel important. It was funny. It was also, in retrospect, one of the show's more complicated satirical choices. The kind that looked differently depending on when you were watching it. For years, the ManBearPig episodes were cited as evidence of Parker and Stone's skepticism about climate change. Al Gore's character in the show, pompous, self-aggrandizing, describing threats in apocalyptic terms that nobody was taking seriously, mapped onto a specific kind of conservative critique of environmental advocacy that the show seemed to be endorsing. Parker and Stone are broadly libertarian in their public political positions. They're suspicious of institutional narratives. The ManBearPig bit read to many viewers as the show saying, "The environmentalists are the ones being absurd." Then came season 22, 2018. ManBearPig returned. And in season 22, ManBearPig is real. It's enormous, it's destructive, it's killing people, and it is unmistakably a metaphor for climate change. Not a metaphor for hysteria about climate change, but climate change itself. The creature that was a joke in season 10 has become a genuine monster, and the show's position on it has shifted entirely. The adults of South Park, having spent years dismissing the warnings, have to face the thing they refuse to take seriously. The episode includes a scene where the boys encounter Al Gore again. He's been wandering in the wilderness for years, warning people who kept refusing to listen. He's not pompous now. He's exhausted and vindicated and a little broken, and the boys have to apologize to him. They tell him directly, "We're sorry we didn't listen." You were right. It's one of the few times the show has issued an apology on its own behalf, through its characters, for a position it had previously taken. Parker and Stone have talked about the ManBearPig arc as a deliberate revision, that the early episodes were operating in a mode of both sides skepticism, that by season 22 they no longer felt was accurate or honest. The science had become clear enough that treating it as a matter of equal debate felt wrong to them. So they made ManBearPig real, had their characters apologize, and moved on. There's a version of this story you could tell as a straightforward redemption arc. Show gets science wrong, show acknowledges it, show corrects its position. That's essentially what happened, but the way South Park told it, through the specific metaphor of ManBearPig, through the image of Al Gore alone in the wilderness, waiting for the world to catch up with him, through a direct on-screen apology from the main characters, is more interesting than a simple retraction. It used its own mythology to carry the correction. It didn't erase the earlier episodes, it answered them. The ManBearPig arc is also one of the clearer examples of something the show does intermittently that doesn't always get recognized as what it is. Long-form character development measured not in episodes but in seasons or years. The Al Gore who appears in Season 22 is a different person from the Al Gore in Season 10. And the difference isn't arbitrary. It tracks the show's own changing relationship with the material. The character aged and changed because the show's understanding of what it was depicting aged and changed. That doesn't happen often in South Park. The show is mostly episodic, mostly resistant to continuity, mostly interested in the joke of this week rather than the arc across years. When it does do long-term development, it tends to be in service of something the creators feel genuinely about. ManBearPig is one of those things. The apology was apparently one they needed to make. There's a quality in the ManBearPig revision that I find worth sitting with as we get later into tonight. The show has a reputation for not apologizing for anything, for treating all sacred cows equally, for refusing to decide that any position is too important to be mocked. That reputation is mostly accurate, but it is the ManBearPig revision is worth holding alongside the show's broader political evolution, which is a more complicated story than it sometimes gets credit for being. Parker and Stone have always described themselves as broadly libertarian, skeptical of institutional authority on both the left and the right, uncomfortable with orthodoxy wherever it comes from. That position has produced some of the show's most interesting episodes, the ones where the show genuinely refuses to take a side because it can see the absurdity on both sides clearly. But the ManBearPig arc shows that the libertarian both sides position has limits for them. When one side is demonstrably empirically correct and the other side is demonstrably empirically wrong, the refusal to choose starts to feel like its own kind of dishonesty. Parker and Stone seem to have arrived at that conclusion through the process of making the episodes rather than before making them. The revision is real, and the willingness to make it, in the form of a giant fantasy creature who turns out to be real, is one of the more honest things the show has ever done about its own previous positions. Let's talk about Imagination Land, because it gets discussed in the context of South Park's best work fairly often, but the full story of how it came together and what it actually represents in the show's history doesn't always get told completely. The Imagination Land trilogy aired across 3 consecutive episodes in Season 11 in October 2007. The premise is this: the boys discover that there is a real place called Imagination Land, a dimension that exists inside human imagination, populated by every fictional character ever imagined. Every hero, every villain, every creature, every icon from every story anyone has ever told. Santa Claus is there, Gandalf is there, Luke Skywalker is there, the Easter Bunny, Aslan, Strawberry Shortcake, the woodland critters from an earlier South Park episode, all of them coexisting in a world that operates on the logic of human storytelling. And then terrorists blow it up. A bomb detonates in Imagination Land, and the barrier between imagination and reality begins to break down. The evil characters, the fictional monsters and villains and horrors start bleeding through into the real world. The US military gets involved. There are congressional hearings about the threat posed by imaginary beings. Butters, who has a particular ability to access Imagination Land through dreaming, becomes the key to fixing everything. The scope of it is genuinely unusual for South Park. This is a 3-part story with a sustained plot, real stakes, and a thematic argument that the show makes consistently across its runtime. Imaginary things are real in the ways that matter. The characters in Imagination Land are real because humans believe in them, because they live in human consciousness, because the stories we tell about them have genuine effects on how we understand the world. When Butters fights to save Imagination Land, he's fighting to save human imagination itself. This is a more sincere argument than South Park usually makes directly. The show tends to mock sincerity even when it's being sincere. There's usually enough irony in the delivery that you can interpret it as a joke if you need to. The Imaginationland trilogy is more committed to its theme than most South Park material. It believes what it's saying about the importance of stories, and it says it through 3 full episodes of television without fully retreating into irony. The trilogy won an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2008 in the over 1 hour category, after Parker and Stone assembled the 3 episodes into a feature-length director's cut for release. The director's cut included unseen footage and resequenced material that improved the pacing. It's genuinely the most polished thing the show ever produced in terms of pure craft. The jokes are sharp, the visual imagination is extraordinary. Given the show's aesthetic constraints, the sheer variety of fictional characters they render in the South Park style is impressive, and the emotional climax actually lands. The legal situation around the trilogy is interesting in its own right. The show includes recognizable versions of a very large number of copyrighted characters from other properties. Luke Skywalker, Gandalf, various Disney characters, the My Little Pony ponies, who are depicted as foot soldiers in the conflict. The legal clearance for an episode like this in 2007 was complicated enough that Parker and Stone have acknowledged they were navigating a genuinely tricky situation. The defense essentially was that the characters appeared as part of a broader parody and comment on the nature of fictional creation. Satire law gives fairly broad latitude for this kind of use. The episodes aired, nobody sued. The woodland critters appearing in Imaginationland is a nice piece of internal mythology worth mentioning briefly. The woodland critters are characters from a season 8 episode called Woodland Critter Christmas, in which what appears to be a sweet Christmas story about adorable forest animals turns into something very dark, very quickly. The woodland critters, it transpires, are Satanists. They want to perform rituals. They are comprehensively awful creatures. The episode is one of the more audacious structural experiments in the show's history. When they reappear in Imaginationland, they're placed on the side of the evil imaginary characters. Because of course they are. They were always going to be there if Imaginationland existed, and they were always going to be on that side of the fight. The callback is wordless. The show doesn't explain it, it just puts them there and trusts that the audience either remembers or will be confused in an interesting way. The Imaginationland trilogy is also, on one level, a love letter to the concept of fiction itself. The argument that fictional characters matter, that the stories we tell affect who we are, that imaginary things have a kind of reality, is an argument about why storytelling is worth doing. It's the show explaining, without quite being able to say it directly, why it exists, what it thinks it's for. South Park is a show that mostly functions by tearing things down, satirizing, mocking, deflating. The Imaginationland trilogy is the moment it turned that energy inward and asked what it was protecting, what it valued, what it was actually for. The answer, delivered through 3 episodes about terrorists attacking the world of imagination, and a small, cheerful boy in a yellow shirt who could save it, is this: stories, imaginary things, the worlds inside people's heads that are real in all the ways that count. That's a strange and genuine thing for this show to have believed. I'm glad it believed it. Most of the main cast of South Park is voiced by Trey Parker and Matt Stone themselves. This is unusual at the level the show operates. For a series of this scale, running this long, the standard industry model involves professional voice actors who specialize in the craft. Parker and Stone have always done most of it themselves, and for a specific reason that has less to do with economics than with the nature of the production. When you're writing a script on Thursday and recording it on Friday and the episode airs Wednesday, there isn't time for a conventional voice recording pipeline. Parker and Stone are in the building, they record as they write. Parker voices Stan, Cartman, Randy, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Timmy, Tweak, Craig, Clyde, Jimmy, and dozens of recurring adult characters. Stone voices Kyle, Kenny. Beneath the hood, to whatever extent Kenny's muffled delivery requires actual voicing. Butters, Kyle's dad Gerald, Jimbo, and many others. The volume of distinct voices Parker manages across a single episode is considerable. Butters is voiced by Matt Stone in a specific way. There's an origin story to the voice itself that Stone has described as essentially an accident. He was trying to find a quality for the character during the early recordings, something that communicated Butters' specific combination of cheerfulness and blissful unawareness of how much the world is against him. And the voice that emerged was a kind of heightened, slightly nasal optimism that he then just kept. It wasn't designed, it arrived. The female voices in the show have had a more complicated history. In the early seasons, most female characters, Sheila Broflovsky, Sharon Marsh, Leon Cartman, and many others, were voiced by Mary Kay Bergman. She was a professional voice actress with an extraordinary range, one of the most technically accomplished voice performers working in animation at the time. And she brought a quality to the female South Park characters that grounded them in a way the show needed. Mary Kay Bergman died by suicide on November 11th, 1999. She was 38 years old. She had been working on South Park until very close to that date. Her death was a shock to everyone at the studio and to the broader animation industry, where she was respected and well-liked. She left behind an enormous body of work across many projects, and her contributions to South Park across its first 3 seasons are present in every female character she voiced during that period. Parker and Stone did not speak extensively in public about her death in the immediate aftermath. It wasn't their story to dominate, and the circumstances were deeply personal. What they did do was acknowledge her passing in the credits of subsequent episodes, and the show has consistently credited her work appropriately in retrospective materials. Her roles were taken over after a period by Eliza Schneider, who voiced the female characters from 1999 through 2003. After Schneider, the roles were divided between April Stewart and Mona Marshall, who have continued in those roles ever since. The transition was handled as sensitively as possible given the circumstances, and the continuity of the female voices in the show is a result of that careful, gradual handover. I mention this because it is a real and significant part of the show's history that doesn't always appear in the more celebratory accounts. South Park has a reputation for being invulnerable, for being a machine that produces episodes on an extraordinary schedule without pause. That reputation is built on genuine achievement. It is also necessarily incomplete. The people who make the show have experienced genuine losses and genuine difficulties. The machine is made of people. Berkman's contribution to the show's early years, the warmth she gave to Sheila Broflovsky in particular, the way her performance made Kyle's home feel like a real home, is audible if you go back to those episodes knowing what you're listening for. Her work is in the show, it stays there. Since we're talking about voice casting, there's one more detail worth mentioning that tends to delight people when they learn it. The character of Saddam Hussein, who appears as a recurring antagonist in several early episodes, most memorably as Satan's abusive partner in various Hellset storylines, is voiced in a specific broad comedic register that owes something to the real Saddam Hussein's actual voice and delivery. When Saddam Hussein was captured by American forces in December 2003 and footage of the capture was broadcast internationally, the South Park team watched it and found that the real man's affect in those recordings was, in an unexpected way, consistent with how they'd been voicing him, which either means they'd been inadvertently accurate or that the real person and the cartoon had arrived at the same register through completely different routes. That's an odd thing to discover about your own show. Parker has mentioned it in interviews with a mixture of amusement and genuine puzzlement. The show had been doing an impression of someone, and then the someone showed up and confirmed the impression by accident. The voice work in South Park is, in a real sense, part of what makes the production pace possible. Because Parker and Stone are both writers and performers, the line between writing and performing a line is collapsed almost completely. When Parker is writing Cartman's dialogue on a Thursday night, he is also already hearing it in Cartman's voice, already knowing the rhythms of the delivery, already editing the words to fit the performance he knows he'll give the next morning. The voice and the writing are the same act. That's genuinely unusual. Most television writing separates those functions, which is part of why those functions take longer. The writer writes, the actor interprets. The two meet in a recording session that requires scheduling and preparation. South Park short circuits all of that, and the voice work is the reason it can. Parker's ability to hold 20 or more distinct voices simultaneously, to switch between them while writing, and to record them accurately under genuine time pressure, at an inconsistent hour of the night after writing for 12 hours with the satellite uplink looming, is the engine room of the whole operation, not the 6-day cycle in the abstract, the specific person in the booth at 1 a.m. In July 2025, Parker and Stone signed a contract extension with Paramount Global worth $1.5 billion. The deal guarantees approximately 50 new episodes over the following several years, at roughly 10 per year, extending the show's run through at least 2029 or 2030. Pause on that number for a moment. $1.5 billion for a cartoon about 4 boys in a Colorado mountain town who have been in 4th grade since 1997. Made by 2 people in a small studio, produced in 6 days per episode. That number is a measure of what 28 seasons of consistent cultural relevance looks like in financial terms. South Park is the 3rd longest running American animated television series after The Simpsons and Arthur. It has outlasted more controversies, more distribution changes, more cultural shifts than almost any comparable show. It moved from broadcast cable to streaming without losing what it was. It navigated the transition from purely episodic television to something more serialized and back again. It absorbed the Isaac Hayes departure and the censored episodes and the China ban and the global pandemic. That last one Parker and Stone handled by writing 2 long-form specials from their homes, which is exactly the kind of response you'd expect from people who built a production system specifically so they wouldn't need a normal studio to operate. The deal with Paramount includes both the new episodes and the streaming rights to the back catalog, which is, in some ways, the more interesting part of the negotiation. Paramount Plus became the exclusive streaming home for South Park in 2025 after the show had previously lived at Hulu, then HBO Max, now here. Each of those moves required the back catalog to be renegotiated and revalued, which tells you something about how television distribution has changed since 1997. The library of over 300 episodes, every season, every special, everything, is a significant part of what makes the overall deal worth the number it's worth. You're not just buying future episodes, you're buying the history. There's something interesting about thinking of South Park as a library rather than a show. Over 300 episodes, plus films, plus specials, plus the 2 theatrical-length Paramount Plus events, that's a substantial body of work that exists independently of whatever new episodes are being made this year. People who have never watched South Park in real time, who came to it through streaming or through recommendations years after a given episode aired, now make up a significant portion of the show's audience. The show is being experienced non-linearly, out of sequence, by people who can watch season 14 before season 6 if they want to, and who encounter the ManBearPig arc or the Kenny mythology without the context of having watched it develop in real time over years. That non-linear experience is interesting in relation to everything we've talked about tonight. The hidden mythology, the planted details, the connections across seasons, all of that was designed to the extent it was designed for an audience watching in sequence over years. An audience that saw Scott Tenorman Must Die in 2001 and then, 9 years later, discovered the paternity reveal in 2001 would experience those 2 pieces of information very differently from an audience that binge watches both in the same afternoon. The decade-long gap was part of the effect. Whether that effect is achievable in the streaming era where nothing has to wait is an open question. The show has continued to plant things across seasons. The 201 reveal was almost its last truly decade-spanning connection, at least in terms of things we know about. There are certainly things in the more recent seasons that haven't fully resolved yet. The $1.5 billion number also reflects something about the show's relationship to the cultural conversation it's been part of. South Park has commented on, satirized, or been a direct participant in nearly every significant cultural event of the past 3 decades: the Clinton impeachment, 9/11, the 2000 election and the 2016 election, and most of the elections in between. Social media, streaming wars, Ozempic, the rise of streaming, then the fragmentation of streaming, then the streaming wars again, the COVID pandemic. Every celebrity scandal that was large enough to warrant sending children after it. The show has been a running commentary on American life for as long as many of its current viewers have been alive. That's a genuinely unusual cultural position to occupy. The Simpsons has held a similar position for longer, but The Simpsons has changed significantly in tone and ambition in its relationship to its own history, in ways that South Park has largely not. South Park in 2025 is recognizably continuous with South Park in 1997 in a way that's both impressive and slightly uncanny. Parker has said in various interviews that he and Stone make the show they want to make, and that what they want to make has remained essentially the same for 28 years. Fast, responsive, honest about what they find funny, and not particularly interested in whether what they find funny is what they're supposed to find funny. The things that got them into trouble in 1997 are still getting them into trouble in 2025. That consistency is either admirable stubbornness or exhausting repetition, depending on what you value in a television show. What I find myself returning to when I think about the $1.5 billion and the 28 seasons and the 6-day production cycle and all the rest of it is the VHS tape. The Christmas card that 2 people made for $750 and didn't even put their names on because they didn't think it would matter. That tape is the thing the $1.5 billion is downstream of. Everything in between is the distance between not thinking it would matter and it mattering enormously, and the fact that the distance was covered by going as fast as possible and not overthinking anything. Let me take a moment before we wind down properly. Let's just breathe for a second. We've covered a lot of ground tonight, and I don't want to rush the ending. That would be wrong for this kind of thing. The ending should feel like what it is, the conversation winding down naturally, not a chapter ending with a dramatic click. So, South Park, 28 seasons, a show that began as 2 people not putting their names on something, grew into a VHS Christmas card that went viral before viral existed, almost ended up on Fox because of a talking piece of poo, arrived on Comedy Central and stayed there for nearly 30 years. A show made with construction paper that became a show made with Maya that always looked like it was made with construction paper. A show written in 6 days that takes 9 months to watch in full. I've been thinking about what actually connects all the things we talked about tonight. The Kenny mythology and the Cartman paternity secret, and the VHS origin story and the bleeped episodes and the ManBearPig revision and everything else. And I think the thread, if there is one, is something about the relationship between accident and intention. Almost nothing in South Park's history went according to a plan. The Christmas card wasn't meant to become a show. The pilot wasn't meant to take 3 months. The theme song's various versions were responses to changing circumstances rather than a roadmap. The Kenny mythology started as a running gag and became something genuinely affecting. The Cartman paternity answer, the real one, the one involving Jack Tenorman, arrived 9 years after the question was first asked. The ManBearPig revision came a decade after the original episode from a position the creators no longer held. Randy Marsh becoming a co-lead happened because the character kept being funnier than anyone expected. The show was built out of accidents, and the people who made it were good at recognizing which accidents were worth following. That instinct, for finding what's actually working rather than executing what was originally planned, is probably the most consistently valuable thing Parker and Stone have. It's what makes the 6-day production cycle work, actually. The pace doesn't give you time to commit to something that isn't working. You have to be honest about what's on the page today because the satellite uplink is on Wednesday. That sounds like a hard way to live, and by the accounts of people who have done it, it is. 120 hours a week, editing while the show is airing, writing pages that animators are already building sets around. But it also produces something that over-planned television rarely achieves, a sense that the show is genuinely alive, that it's responding to something real, that the people making it are telling you what they actually think right now, rather than what they thought 6 months ago and have since moved past. The hidden things we talked about tonight are interesting partly because they exist at all in a show with this production pace. The Kenny mythology spanning more than a decade. The Cartman paternity connection sleeping in the background of a season 5 episode for 9 years. The ManBearPig arc running from season 10 to season 22 as a kind of slow editorial correction across 12 years of television. These things require patience. They require someone somewhere to have held a thread and not let go of it, even when the production pressure was enormous and nobody was specifically assigned to remember it. The answer to how this is possible, I think, is that some things stick. Some details, once they're in the show, become part of what the show is, and Parker or Stone or someone in the building carries them the way you carry a detail about a friend. Not consciously, not formally, but as part of the accumulated knowledge of what this thing is. The Tenorman connection was probably known by someone for all 9 of those years. The ManBearPig revision was probably a conversation that existed at some level before it became an episode. Things don't always exist in documents. Sometimes they exist in people. And sometimes, of course, they don't exist anywhere except on fan wikis. Which brings us back to where we started, in a way. The creators leaning on the community's memory. The lores living in the people who watched rather than the people who made. There's something unexpectedly right about that for a show that has always been more interested in its audience's intelligence than most television gives itself credit for. South Park has always assumed rightly that its viewers can handle complexity, that you can put a dark mythology inside a running gag and people will find it eventually, that you can make a political point through the medium of a half-man, half-bear, half-pig creature, and the point will land for the people it needs to land for, that you can bleep a speech about censorship, and the audience will understand instantly that the bleeped words aren't the problem. The boys have been in 4th grade since 1997. They will almost certainly still be in 4th grade in 2029 or 2030 when the current deal expires. They have not aged, they have not graduated, they have not grown up in the way that characters usually grow up when a show runs this long. They're still at the bus stop, still wearing the same hats, the same coats, still waiting for the bus that comes every morning in a town where absolutely everything is always going wrong. There's a choice in that, and it's not an accidental one. Parker and Stone have said they don't want the characters to grow up because growing up would change what they are. The boys work because they're small, because their perspective is a child's perspective applied to adult situations, which produces a particular kind of absurdity and a particular kind of clarity. Children, the show has always argued, often see things more clearly than adults, precisely because they haven't yet learned how to look away. Stan's line, the one he delivers in various forms across the show's history, the moment when he looks at whatever absurd situation the episode has built and says quietly and directly what's actually happening, is the most consistent device in the show's history. It's how the episodes end more often than not. Not with a joke, but with a child saying what's true and the adults ignoring it, or the situation resolving anyway, without the truth quite landing the way it should. That's the show's real position, I think. Underneath all the shock and the satire and the 6-day productions and the billion-dollar deals, that children can see what adults can't, that the truth is usually simpler than the adults want it to be, that someone, somewhere needs to just say the thing. It's getting late, and I think that's probably the right place to leave this particular evening. We talked about a Christmas card that became a television series because one executive sent it to about 35 friends, and it spread the way things spread when they're genuinely funny. We talked about construction paper and stop-motion photography and the digital pipeline that replaced it while keeping the same rough look. We talked about a theme song with 5 versions, one of which had Timmy Birch filling in for a character who was temporarily dead. We talked about Kenny's real mythology and what it says about a show that can hide genuine tragedy inside a recurring joke for a decade without the joke losing its function. We talked about a cliffhanger nobody had the answer for, and an April Fool's episode designed to make fans furious. About 2 characters who are portraits of their creators, about a real kid named Kenny who used to disappear and come back and nobody mentioned it, about episodes that are gone, about an exit that happened under circumstances that were never fully explained, about a background dad who became the show's lead without anyone planning it, about an environmental monster that turned real across 12 years, about a trilogy that won an Emmy for caring about imagination in a show that mostly pretends not to care about anything. And I talked about the $1.5 billion that is, at some level, the world assigning a number to what a VHS tape made for $750 eventually became, which is an absurd enough trajectory to be, honestly, a South Park episode in its own right. If you've drifted off somewhere in the middle of all that, that's fine. You can come back to whatever you missed another time. The show's still there. The lore's still there. And if this sparks something, a memory of an episode you haven't thought about in years, a detail you want to look into, a season you want to go back and watch with fresh eyes, that's what these evenings are for. 4 kids, a bus stop, snow on the ground. They've been there since 1997. They'll probably still be there long after most of us have stopped watching, but the bus always comes